Why is it despite all of his red flags, you only see the good in him? You're swept up in the connection, the chemistry, the synchronicity of it all. Is it all really worth it despite those red flags? If you're watching here, you'll know that it's not. Someone that has significant red flags, the relationship is going to end eventually badly. Red flags are red for a reason. You cannot have a healthy relationship with someone that has significant red flags. And if you have a tendency to ignore red flags, it's a sign of a level of self-delusion, which means that you have a faulty attachment blueprint. The need to self-delude is the sign of a fantasy bond happening, and this is going to stop you from having healthy relationships. And actually always choose and attract unhealthy partners. I'm going to unpack this more today, and make sure you stick around to the end because I'm going to show you how to rewire your body to experience a feeling of being turned off by red flags. And if this is your first time to my channel, welcome. I'm Amy, and I help women who've left a toxic relationship to heal their self-abandonment and to stop falling for emotionally unavailable or wrong men by healing the core wound at the level of the body so they can be happy on their own and their true authentic self in love. And if that does sound like you, please click the subscribe button, hit the bell notification so you get notified when I post new lessons every week. Before I begin, Heal Your Heart School is open for enrollment, so if you'd like to know how to work with me, how to apply for that, make sure you stick around to the end of today's lesson. What causes us to ignore those red flags is that belief that the love and connection of what we have with that person is actually worth it. We're making that our priority, and we might have a history with them, we might have children with them, so many years together, and this kind of magical story about how we got together with them, and this feeling of home or familiarity with them, which completely contradicts the fact that in the relationship there is no safety because these red flags are significant, right? Maybe trust has been eroded, maybe you feel uncertain of where you stand with them, and there's no repair in the relationship, right? There's this feeling that you're not standing on a healthy foundation with them because of the red flags, yet you hang on to them because of this magical feeling of this connection is so good, it's so strong, and you love them so much. Now, I'm speaking from experience here. So I created this unbelievable saga in my mind of my connection with that person that led me to ignore the red flags. You know, there was this kind of feeling that I'd met them in a past life, that they were a soulmate, twin flame. I was using all those words, and I'd put him on a massive pedestal. And all it was I was triggered by these kind of feelings of familiarity or feeling like he was home, but it drove me absolutely crazy because of his infidelity, because of his lying, his gaslighting, his cheating. I couldn't trust him. Like, I was completely uncertain of where the relationship stood. I was completely uncertain of how he felt about me. You know, he'd say he loved me, but then all these other things would get in the way. It was absolutely maddening. And what I didn't realize is that I had an amazing internal mechanism to ignore and self-delude those red flags that were coming up. And I didn't realize that those feelings of familiarity, feelings of being safe and at home with a person in the context of what I experienced were red flags because I'd had an insecure attachment at the time. And in my upbringing, it was a sign that I was going to be repeating a familiar dynamic from a childhood relationship that I had with a caregiver, and that was problematic. So the connection that I saw, that I felt, was actually made up creation of mine, triggered by this feeling of, oh, this reminds me of something, and it was actually the emotional unavailability and that dynamic that I experienced when I was really young. And the connection and the love that I was feeling was actually a trauma response from the earliest relationships I had, where I had to create a fantasy bond, a fantasy connection with my caregiver in order to feel safe and to feel connected in a way in a disconnected home environment. So I was actually playing out the fantasy bond that I'd had with a parent or parents with my new person to feel connected in the same way. This was all completely subconscious. So let's unpack all of those aspects. Firstly, let's look at your attachment blueprint or faulty attachment blueprint. And this is something you might call insecure attachment, or you might know of anxious, or all of the other labels there. We don't need to focus on labels. We just need to focus on what's happened and why and where it's actually come from. So we learn how to attach to our romantic partners through our earliest relationships in childhood. That's how we show love. That's how we feel connected. And if we didn't learn secure relating in our earliest relationships, we learn a faulty or maladaptive blueprint in order to get our needs met. So If your caregivers were emotionally unavailable or dysregulated, their nervous systems were all over the place, you might have felt a sense of abandonment, you might have actually been abandoned in some way, like a parent left the household, there was a divorce or maybe a death. And if you have a poor memory of your childhood and you know that you did not feel seen, heard, understood, known and safe and loved enough, you might have spent a lot of time crying in your room on your own and no one came to repair, my experience. This is a sign that you would have learned these maladaptive behaviors in order to still stay connected to an environment and to caregivers that just weren't meeting your needs enough. So these subconscious behaviors were learnt extremely young, and if we don't mature out of them, we do carry them through into adulthood. So one maladaptive behavior is this concept of fantasy bonding, right? Which is where we actually cannot believe our parents are at fault when our needs aren't being met. It's wired into us to not believe that it's our parents' fault, to believe that it's something to do with us, right? It would actually destroy our ability to develop, for our brains to develop, if we didn't feel connected to the people giving us care and looking after us, because connection is just as important as food, shelter, water to our primitive brain when we are young growing up. So we have this brilliant mechanism that turns it around on us, and we start to believe that there's something wrong with us here, and this is where we start to feel this sense of there's something wrong with me, I'm broken, I'm not good enough, I'm not lovable. Now, in order to cope with this intensely painful kind of scenario, like what is wrong with me, what have I done wrong to not get my needs met, we create a false version of reality and of our bond with the parent in order to feel safe, to feel bonded and connected. Despite their erratic, unpredictable, or emotionally unavailable behavior, in the context of your romantic relationships, you would have brought this behavior into it as well. So firstly, you will only see the good things in them, right? You'll have this cognitive bias. So for instance, that example with, saying someone tells you about a red car and you see the red car and you feel that maybe you sit in it and you're thinking about this red car, you've got a cognitive bias on, and you walk down the street and now all of a sudden all you can see is red cars. That's what we call cognitive bias. So you will have a cognitive bias to only see the good in the person that is your primary attachment figure. And it is a safety mechanism that allows you to feel bonded and safe and connected, right? Anything outside of that is just simply noise. We won't even acknowledge them. So outside of what's good to the connection will be those red flags, and they will just be white noise to you, right? You probably kind of see them and acknowledge them, but they don't land into you because they don't actually form part of what you're scanning for in your environment to stay connected with that person. Now remember, what they're actually doing and the reality of their behaviors is so awful and so terrible. It's creating this need for us to create a fantasy bond with them in order to stay connected with them and to feel safe. And so the version of them that we're connecting to is not actually them. And interestingly, our body is experiencing that kind of erratic, unpredictable behavior. And at the same time, we're actually being wired to experience love as erratic, unpredictable, and emotionally unavailable. So that's what we think love is. That's what we're drawn to. And our nervous system is always turned on because of that. We think that that is actually love. And if we come across a healthy partner, because they don't make us feel that way that we felt with our erratic, unpredictable dynamic from childhood, we might just think, oh, this doesn't feel right at all, or this is really boring, because it's not producing that heightened sense of anxiety or uncertainty that we're also then connecting in with this fantasy bond. So we are naturally going to seek out and date erratic, unpredictable, emotionally unavailable, toxic people if we had that kind of experience when we were young. You're not going to consciously be aware of this, but if you look back and look at all your relationships in your life and you've constantly been in relationship with someone that's unhealthy every single time, this is a clear sign that you have a faulty attachment blueprint in this sense. Now, the third aspect of this is that a trauma bond will develop out of this. And this is where a long-term attachment results in a trauma bond. And if you want to know more about what a trauma bond is, I want you to watch this video next. But that is a bond that closely follows a familiar dynamic from childhood. Not the trauma you're actually experiencing in the relationship with them, although there will no doubt be that if they're unhealthy and just not, relationship material, but it actually mirrors the initial site and the initial dynamic of trauma from childhood. That is what a trauma bond is. And you will feel inexplicably bonded to someone, like in this kind of magical way. like that you can't put words in, but you're actually just experiencing a neurochemical reaction to the dynamic that is being recreated by the person that you are choosing. Now, this fantasy bond, this trauma bond, these all are born out of deeper attachment trauma, which is when you don't have healthy relationships in childhood, you experience attachment trauma, and this is what makes your attachment blueprint faulty or maladaptive is a better word. And this is a sense that you have that relationships are not inherently safe at all. You need to be hypervigilant. You learn this kind of anxious or avoidant way of relating if you're into attachment styles, and you have this felt sense of being alone, of not being understood, of being an outsider, like a scapegoat or a black sheep, and there's this kind of disconnect between you and others around you. You might have trouble making friends, you might just be a loner, or might be like hyper independent. This is a kind of abandonment trauma, right? It might be a subtle feeling that's developed from childhood where your bids for connection and your needs from a young age consistently weren't being met in a subtle way. Or the trauma might have been an acute one where you actually were abandoned by a person, a caregiver, there was a death or a divorce or something like that. It can be one of the two. And this connection, this fantasy bond you're having with this person that's the reason why you're ignoring the red flags is actually your coping mechanism to not feel those deeper feelings of abandonment that have been building up over time and live in your body. So of course it's going to be incredibly difficult for you to leave this person because at the moment this relationship and this person is your way of ignoring and just not dealing with what's happened in the past. And in my experience, it was only when the pain of the red flags overtook the pleasure of the fantasy bond that I'd created with them did I start to leave. But you do not need to wait till then. You can start healing now. You can start exiting. We can get you started on this whole process. So the first thing you need to do is just to get really crystal clear on the reality of the situation outside of the fantasy bond, what is actually going on in your life. So I have a great video that goes through 2 equations to help you see the reality of whether it's worth to stay or whether it's not. You can watch that video here. And you need to start to meet your own attachment needs outside of the relationship. You've probably been getting all of your needs met from within the relationship container, or at least you've been trying to with that fantasy bond and projecting them onto them and trying to get them to do things and be a certain way. But you need to now look outside, deepen your friendships, deepen your own self-love practices, nourish yourself, start that internal connection of meeting your own needs as well. You know, spending time on your own doing nourishing practices. It's going to feel incredibly uncomfortable. You don't want to do it. You're going to want to divert to external validation to get your needs met, but this is simply a habit. This is simply a behavior you've learnt. You've taught yourself to deal with things. You can now teach yourself the other way around in order to now deal with it in a new, healthier way. So how do we actually rewire our body so that we're put off by red flags instead of being so attracted by them? The first thing you need to do is to start to create internal safety in your body, right? You've probably got an obsessive mind. You need to learn how to calm it down. Start a meditative practice. Start learning how to concentrate and focus and not be in that fantasy, not being thinking about how great they are, right? Rather than just ignoring reality. Another aspect of creating safety in the body is breathing, creating internal space. So you might think, well, hang on, I breathe all the time. But actually, when you practice some of the beautiful pranayama practices out there, you will notice how incredibly powerful the breath is in connection to the mind. So start doing some different breathing techniques, doing, breath work, whatever works for you to get yourself embodied, to give you that internal space. And you need to connect to the internal part that's going to keep craving him and craving the connection. And this is an internal part we work with in Heal Your Heart School. And it's an important part to get into relationship with, because we need to actually allow ourselves to heal her, to heal that part of us, rather than always allow that part to seek out like a little child wanting another hit of dopamine, from the candy store. We can actually learn how to soothe and heal that part internally. We can give that part, sometimes some people call it the inner child, the wounded inner child, or inner part. If you've done IFS work, we need to give her love and attention and listen to her and help her feel loved and connect to the body's experience of her as well, because there's no doubt a lot of pain a lot of feelings of loneliness and abandonment, because remember, this originally came from your initial site of abandonment inside the body. So when you were very, very young, you first experienced it. And so you've been carrying all of that energy with you, and it might be incredibly uncomfortable to start with. Bring yourself to, the experience of this person that those red flags are coming from, and notice and connect to your body's experience of him when the red flag comes up, right? When we ignore red flags, we're actually ignoring the signals from our body. We're living from the neck up. Our body is incredibly intelligent when we allow it to do what it needs to do. And quite often you'll feel a pain in your gut. You'll feel your throat clench up. You'll feel tightening in your chest. Your body will give you a signal that something is not right, that something is really off, but we've got to actually learn to pay attention to it. So the tool is learning body awareness, and then listening to your body when you're in the presence of a potential red flag, and noticing it and actually paying attention to it and treating it seriously, rather than just saying, oh, I think I've got a pit in my stomach because I ate something bad when the red flag is happening. No. Your body is giving you a signal you need to pay attention to, and you'll start to associate your bodily sensations with the red flags, with discomfort in your body. And this is a particularly important skill when you're dating someone new, to know whether they're right for you or not. So body awareness, listening to the body sensations, listening to the body's signals, is what's going to get you out of and rewiring your experience of red flags from thinking that it's a good thing and you can feel safe and familiar and relive your childhood dynamic with them, to being embodied, being fully aware in discernment of whether this is right for you or not. Now, if you want more information on healing your attachment trauma and healing those inner parts I talked about earlier, I want you to watch my 1-hour webinar on the 3 steps to self-love after a toxic relationship ends. I go into it in detail there. We actually do an exercise in that webinar. You can join that in the link below. I also have a Facebook group. I'd love to meet you in person in there. Join, come say hi, join a live. We do that every week. And if you want to apply to work directly with me inside Heal Your Heart School, you can apply for that in the calendar link below. Just book a time and someone on my team or myself will take that call with you. And if you found this video helpful, please click the like button just to help my channel out in the algorithm, and comment below. Let me know what you thought of the video. If you have any questions or comments, any concerns, I can help you out in the comments as well. And here are some next step videos for you to follow to help you move one step closer to having an incredible relationship with yourself and with your future partner. And for now, I'll see you in the next video.